समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Almost unnoticed, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio said last week that he's considering banning the Muslim Brotherhood, the organization that laid the foundations for Al-Qaeda and other jihadist group movements across the world. Trump had promised to deliver on this issue in 2019 but backed down for a simple reason. Today, the Persian Gulf monarchy of Qatar is the biggest financier of the Brotherhood, seeing it as protection against jihadists and as a tool of ideological influence. For a time, Abdul Rahman Al-Ammudi flew with the angels, flitting across the landscape of the most powerful city on earth. Friend to America's most powerful, he served as goodwill ambassador for American Muslims for the State Department, and his American Muslim Council was described by no less than the Federal Bureau of Investigations as, and I quote, the most mainstream Muslim group in the United States. Together with President George W. Bush, he had mourned the victims of 9/11 at the Washington National Cathedral. Later, he opened the door for an imam to read the opening invocation for a session of Congress. Real power. Then, in 2003, a police search at Heathrow Airport found $340,000 packed into his hand baggage, a little bit over 3 kilos of neat new $100 bills for those who were curious. Libya had paid the money to assassinate the then Saudi Crown Prince Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, Al-Ammudi would admit at his trial. Further investigation, the CBI also said at that trial, revealed his AMC, American Muslim Council, was routing funds to Hamas and Hezbollah. Last week, almost no one noticed when Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he was considering a ban on the Muslim Brotherhood, describing them as, and I quote, a grave concern. The Islamist organization has long been proscribed in many countries like Egypt, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and most recently in the Kingdom of Jordan. The Brotherhood, though, is also a critical ally of the nation which just donated President Donald Trump a Boeing 747 and has deep business ties to his immediate family. For decades, Qatar has used the Muslim Brotherhood as a means to project influence across the Middle East, even providing Hamas with its headquarters and funding. Trump had promised to ban the Brotherhood back in 2019, but that plan disappeared into the sands, perhaps under a pile of Qatari cash. For Trump, acting against the Brotherhood now could offer a small but politically significant prize. It would be a weapon to smear the pro-Palestine organizations criticizing his Israel policies, and it might rally his white nationalist supporters around Islamophobia. The consequences of a ban, however, will stretch across the world, dramatically impacting the Islamist political landscape. Founded in 1928 as the anti-colonial movement began to gather in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood was set up by the schoolteacher Hassan al-Banna. Frustrated at the religious establishment's failure to resist cultural westernization in cities like Cairo, al-Banna preached for religious revival in coffee shops, small mosques, and on the street, anywhere he could find an audience. Egypt's liberation, al-Banna insisted, could be brought about only by building a society based on the Sharia or religious law, not imports like liberalism or socialism. Foreign students studying in Cairo, which was a big intellectual center of the time, carried this message across the world, historian Lorenzo Vedino writes. Through 1940, 1944, as the Second World War raged, British diplomats sought to buy off the Brotherhood in an effort to cool it off. According to the scholar James Hayward Dunn, writing in 1950, Al-Banna offered to end anti-British mobilization in return for $40,000 in cash and a car. The truth we don't know, but the talks went nowhere. By 1941, the Middle East Intelligence Committee had identified Brotherhood operatives in Sudan, Algeria, Amman, Beirut, Aleppo, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and even Hyderabad in India. Even as the Brotherhood's special squads in Egypt now began using terrorism to eliminate their rivals and the British, scholar Martin Frampton has written, Al-Banna simultaneously reached out to diplomats from the United Kingdom and the United States, proposing a joint front against communism. The relationship proved unsustainable. In 1947, Brotherhood member Rifat Abdul Rahman Al-Nagar, an Air Force officer, bombed the King George Hotel in Ismailia. That was a British intelligence base. Soon after came the assassination of Prime Minister Mahmoud Fahmy al-Nukarashi, which led Egypt to ban the Brotherhood. Al-Banna himself was murdered by the secret police in February 1949. The revolt which brought President Gamal Abdel Nasser and the Free Officers movement to power in 1952 was initially greeted with joy by the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood's Islamists had fought together in the street battles in Gaza together with the Free Officers against Israel and helped plot the downfall of King Farouk bin Ahmad Fuad's monarchy. But the Brotherhood's insistence on Sharia, though, rapidly alienated them from Nasser, and the movement ended up being crushed. Far from home, though, the Brotherhood found supporters willing to offer it refuge and resources. Al-Banna's successor, Sayyid Qutb, studied on a United States government fellowship in 1949, returning repelled by the relative sexual freedoms of American women, as well as of jazz, which he describes as, in very racist language, the music of, I quote unquote, savage bushmen. Egyptian Islamist leader Saeed Ramadan, another senior Brotherhood official, traveled with a delegation of anti-communist clerics to meet with no less than US President Dwight Eisenhower in 1953. The following year, he was granted asylum in Germany. Following the asylum, the French journalist Caroline Forest has written that Ramadan emerged in Pakistan. Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan of Pakistan wrote the preface to one of Ramadan's books and gave him a slot on national radio to propagate his ideas. Ensconced in Karachi, Ramadan also became close to Al-Ammudi, who had founded the Brotherhood's Indian wing, the Jamaat-e-Islami, which still exists today in both India and Pakistan. Large parts of Maududi's work, interestingly, are reproduced verbatim in Brotherhood literature. I guess we'd call that plagiarism these days. Elsewhere, Western intelligence officials had meanwhile begun rebuilding their contacts, with the journalist Ian Johnson revealing that the US and the United Kingdom had started recruiting the remnants of the Nazi Muslim Legion, hoping to use the Central Asians against the Soviet Union. Later, some commentators would charge the Brotherhood with deception, saying it claimed to represent moderation while actually maintaining ties with jihadist terror groups. There's some truth in this, but in Al-Ammudi's case, this is demonstrably untrue. Al-Ammudi publicly supported Hamas and Hezbollah and demanded the release of Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, the blind Egyptian cleric jailed for plotting to blow up New York landmarks. In one phone call intercepted by the FBI, Al-Ammudi claimed that Al-Qaeda's 1998 bombings in East Africa were wrong, but only because, I quote, many African Muslims have died and not a single American died. Yet, for reasons that have never been explained and probably lie hidden in an archive somewhere, Al-Ammudi was allowed to work with the US Defense Department to recruit imams to meet the religious needs of Muslims in the United States military. The campaigns of President George Bush, Senator Hillary Clinton, President Bill Clinton's wife, and Senator Cynthia McKinney all accepted generous campaign donations from Al-Ammudi. This, even though the American Muslim Council, or AMC, represented no significant groups of Muslims as such. It just had some 5,000 members. Foundations for enmeshing well-funded Brotherhood front organizations into the political system across the West had in fact been laid decades before Al-Ammudi and the AMC emerged. Khurshid Ahmad, among Maududi's earliest followers, and later Senator and Minister of Planning under the regime of General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq, was assigned the task of propagating the Brotherhood's message in the West. From around 1968, we know records, when he was living in the United Kingdom, Khurshid and his Middle Eastern colleagues from the Brotherhood began receiving funding from the Saudi Arabian embassy in London in 1973. This would flower into the Islamic Council of Europe, or ICE, which operated from London's ultra-posh Belgravia neighborhood. Later, in 1977, at a conference in the luxury resort town of Lugano, Khurshid and other ICE leaders set up the Brotherhood's first operations in the United States, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, or IIIT. From at least 1991, the Brotherhood had an informal manifesto guiding its operations in the United States, advocating for creating networks of decentralized organizations that upheld American values. These efforts, though, were driving a less genteel story too. Like generations of jihadists, the young fighters who thronged to Pakistan to combat the Soviet Union in Afghanistan were drawn in by the Brotherhood's words and its networks. The prominent jihadist Abdullah Azam, scholar Thomas Heghammer has written in his biography, not only laid the foundations for Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda, but also for the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which we in India came to know only too well. Following 9/11, Western diplomatic and intelligence services for a time severed all contact with the Brotherhood. The standoff was not, however, to last long, and they were soon the best of enemies. In 2006, the British journalist Martin Bright revealed that the United Kingdom's Foreign Office was considering reopening ties with figures it described as moderate Islamists. The British government paid for Brotherhood ideologue Yusuf al-Qaradawi, very controversial for his anti-Semitic statements, to attend a conference in Turkey, and also funded 2 Islamist youth organizations at home. These were the Federation of Islamic Student Societies and the Young Muslim Organization. This process gathered momentum in the coming years as the United Kingdom concluded that the war in Afghanistan was unwinnable. In 2011, the Foreign Office even paid for Taliban leader Abdul Salam Zaif to attend a conference in London, and he was then privately hosted for a hunting vacation in Scotland. Leaked diplomatic correspondence scholars Frampton and Ehud Rosen write show American authorities were hawkish in their public statements on the Muslim Brotherhood, but at the same time intensified efforts to identify so-called moderates who would reject jihadist violence and thus hollow out the jihadist threat from within. The Brotherhood also proved a key ally in the long game to dethrone the regime of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The Al-Ammudi case wasn't the only one to show the perils of this path. The prosecution of the Holy Land Foundation, alleged to have channeled millions of dollars to Hamas, threw up disturbing evidence of connivance by various linked organizations named as unindicted co-conspirators, like the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, and the North American Islamic Trust. The case collapsed in 2007, but from the documents released during the trial, researchers and scholars have been able to establish deep links between these networks and the Brotherhood. Zeno Baran is among the many scholars who has dug deep into the connections between the individuals and the organizations. Across the Middle East, the Brotherhood's significance has appeared to wane in recent years as new jihadist groups like the Islamic State have emerged, and the threat from Al-Qaeda to the West has diminished. Many young jihadists mistrust, even hate the Brotherhood for collusion. But the Brotherhood and its networks continue to provide the bedrock for Islamic movements across the world, holding up a vast and complex system of ideological persuasion, fundraising, and mobilization. Banning the Brotherhood as well as sister organizations like the Jamaat-e-Islami in India or Pakistan won't end terrorism. It's moved beyond that. To misuse this issue to smear Muslim communities as a whole, a real danger under Trump, holds out the threat of alienating millions of believers who are at least as hostile to terrorism and jihadism as the rest of their nations. The decision will, however, signal the end of a toxic romance between Islamism and the West and make clear that ideologies propagating hate and violence cannot be carried out by raising American dollars. For now, we'll just have to see whether Trump's Qatar connections allow him to take that step. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm contributing editor at ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.